Welcome to episode 2 of the Fibre Guys Corner with your host, me, Adam Foster. So, I asked last episode for any questions that you at home listening may have, and wow, you did not disappoint. I got a really good question regarding hypermobility from Lisa Kelly. Kelly basically asked, are there any tips and tricks to help with things like subluxations and dislocations and training around kind of getting them to stop? Now, that's a good question. So, hypermobility. So there's a lot of different ways people can be hypermobile. You can have somebody who has shallow joints and they can be hypermobile, and then you have the people who push towards more so the connective tissue disorders, things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Now, the fact that it's called hypermobility is a bit of a misnomer, really. So mainly for the people at home listening, this is going to be more so in regards to things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or hypermobility spectrum disorder, where it should really be called hyperlaxity, because that's more or less what it is, to be honest. It's where the connective tissue is a little bit more lax than it should be. Now, don't get too put off if you have got a connective tissue disorder, because the fact that the tissue is lax doesn't actually stop us from stabilizing the joints. Now, one of the biggest issues people are going to have is they're going to go to the doctors and they're going to go to physios or other health professionals, and they're going to hear the same things. You need to build some muscle to strengthen your joints. Now, this is a bit ridiculous, really. I tell you what, let's pretend we've got little Johnny. He turns 18 and we start bodybuilding with him. In 6 months' time, little Johnny is going to be a hell of a lot stronger. He's also going to look a little bit different. He might have lost a little bit of body fat. His tissues will be holding a little bit more water. But realistically, he's going to put next to no real muscle mass on. Keep in mind, the average male with all of the testosterone they have can only put on about 8 pounds a year. That's nothing really, especially distributed around the body. If you push more into anabolic steroids, you're looking at more kind of 30 to 35 pounds of muscle a year. So there is a big difference in that regards. Now, so if we look at little Johnny, he has got stronger, but it's not because he's put massive amounts of muscle on. It's what we call neural adaptation. It's about his brain getting used to contracting the muscle fibers he already has. And that's why you find in a lot of training programs that you'll fly the first 6 months, and as soon as you've hit that 6-month wall, you kind of plateau out. Because remember, every system of your body needs stress to adapt, and once you've adapted to the stress, that stress isn't going to work anymore. So you have to mix things up and make it harder for your body to not want to adapt. So the same is true for people with, let's say, knees that sublux. So if anybody doesn't know, listening at home, a subluxation is basically just a partial dislocation where it goes out and back in really quickly and causes a little bit of micro tears, a little bit of kind of micro trauma. So if anybody has, let's say, knees that sublux slightly or even dislocate, it's going to take them years and years and years to build up enough tissue to kind of get anywhere in the realms of what the physiotherapist or your healthcare professional is suggesting. But this is why I really wanted to do this podcast, is to get this kind of misinformation, hammered away and get the real information out there. So I have clients with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome who would dislocate their shoulders picking up a cup of coffee, and 6 weeks later they're on monkey bars playing with their children. If it was anything to do with muscle mass or the strength of the muscle, this would not be physically possible. But it is, because it happens all of the time. I have a success wall full of it. So, if we go through the kind of mechanics of it, when the knee goes backwards, at a certain point, proprioceptors, nerves and kind of that will help you know where that joint is in space and time, should tell your brain exactly where the joint is. You should then use your first stabilizing system, which is muscles. The muscles should contract around the joint to hold it in place. Now, if you're hypermobile, a lot of your proprioception, knowing where your joint is in space and time, comes from skin. But if you have something like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, collagen makes up a massive amount of skin, so it can be a little bit different to kind of the general public's. So your proprioception is going to be a little bit impaired. That doesn't mean you can't get it better, but let's just start as we mean to go on. So your proprioception is going to be a little bit impaired even, which means that when your joint does go back, where it hits the point when it should stop, it isn't going to. It's going to keep going backwards in the hyperextension until eventually it's going to bounce off your secondary braking system, i.e. ligaments. We have specialized nerves in our bodies called nociceptors, and nociceptors detect anything that might be dangerous, or what you call noxious stimulus. This is actually what René Descartes got confused about, and confused and conflated pain with nociception and called them pain receptors, when in fact there are no nerves that send pain to the brain. Pain is a product of the brain. So these specialized nerves that detect extremes, so extremes in pressure, chemicals, temperature, vibration, stretch. If you do go in hyperextension and you start stretching on the ligaments, nociceptors are going to fire. They are going to go to your brain and they're going to say, look, brain, something is going on down there that could be potentially dangerous. There's a good chance your brain is then going to create a kind of a movement reflex where you're going to jolt back on your leg, and you're probably more than likely going to create a little bit of pain. Now, for anybody in the general population, this isn't a problem. It will happen occasionally, especially in men and women who play, say, football. So if they get a pretty aggressive tackle, what happens is that tackle somebody's football boot might create enough force to push that knee back pretty quickly. And if it's quick enough, it's not going to give your brain enough time to react. So obviously the primary braking system isn't going to stop that knee going backwards. So that's when your secondary braking system, your ligaments, should really kick in. So, solutions. I'm a big fan of tactile cues. Basically, a tactile cue is tactile information that lets your brain know something's going on in a specific area of your body. So, compression is a pretty good way to create this. Let's look at KT tape, for instance, or neuromuscular tape for people who use that. What you'll normally find is that somebody can have a knee that is prone to subluxations, and they can use KT tape and strap the knee up, and it can massively help to stop it from happening. Now, the tape alone is not strong enough to hold that joint in place, but what it does is going to help, because what it's going to do is the tape is going to irritate the nerves around the knee that are then going to go and tell your brain, look, something's going on down here at the knee, you need to check it out. And your brain has a much better idea of where the actual joint is, and it will be able to do a much better job at actually getting the muscles to stabilize that particular joint. Now, there are some problems with this, is because you are, after a while, going to get used to it, and those signals are going to start getting ignored, and the tape's going to become useless. You've also got the fact that a lot of people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are going to be allergic to the tape and even the non-allergy stuff. It's just part and parcel of things like Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So there is a slight issue with that. So you can use wrist straps or knee straps when you are doing your training to let your brain know where the joint is, so you get a better idea of knowing where the actual joint is in space and time. Don't use the compression all of the time for the reasons I've already discussed. Remember, you need stress to adapt to. So one of my biggest kind of, well, I wouldn't say tips or tricks, but one thing that I really like to use for, let's say, subluxating knees is I'll get a TheraBand and attach it to something knee height. I'll then pull the band back a little bit so it's got good stretch to it, and I'll ask a client to step into it, and I'll place the TheraBand behind the knee. So the band is pulling their knee joint forward. Now, this is the important bit. You have to load that joint. So let's say we've got the band behind the right knee. Then the client needs to lift the left leg off the floor so they can actually get that entire side of the body working as one unit. And then you can move into some stuff like unilateral hip extensions. Now, the band pulling forward acts as a massive tactile cue to let the brain know exactly where the joint is. Because you have something outside of your body, the band pulling that joint into kind of flexion, your brain will ask the nerves to temporarily turn up, innervate the tissue a little bit more, and increase the muscle tone, which means you're going to be able to contract the muscle a lot better than if you didn't have that tactile cue. Now, when you're doing this, it gives you a joint, and for pretty much every single person who does it, you will not be able to physically hyperextend in this position. It is virtually impossible. Some people can, but there is a distinct difference between where the joint stops and then they really have to force it back. But it gives your brain a good indicator of where that joint is supposed to stop naturally. And more importantly, it gives the person who's doing the exercise a good indicator of where that joint is. And you can train it in letting your brain know where the joint is, doing simple things like that. There's a ton of other stuff which we will cover on different episodes, and this stuff does get a little bit complicated because it's much better to said in person, and more so with the diagram or a video to go with it. But I do think on the YouTube channel I will put up a video on tactile cues. So if I haven't done it in the next week or so, give me an email, guys, and give me a reminder, because I do have a memory like a fish. So I hope that has helped to answer the hypermobility question. I am going to dive into this a little bit more in depth on YouTube and get that video up, as I said. But key points to note: it's not about the muscle. It's not about that muscle tissue. It's not about how much. It doesn't matter. You already have enough muscle to stabilize that joint. It's just letting your brain know where the joint is. Strap your knee up with a little bit of tape if you can deal with it. Use a compression sock around your knee, or a wrist strap that bodybuilders use to stabilize their wrist joints when they're bench pressing heavy weight. Just something that's going to irritate that joint, and the nerves inside that joint, that are going to tell your brain where that joint is. So, from me to you guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you on the flip side for episode 3. Take it easy.